This is Husker Sports Network Originals, presented by J-Tech Construction, the official exterior experts of Husker Nation. Husker Sports Network Originals tell iconic stories from Husker history, featuring insights from the players and coaches who live them. Subscribe to the Husker Sports Network on your favorite podcast service. And now, Brook, the life of a Husker legend.
Well, a lot of things go through my mind when I think of Brook. I remember watching him play, obviously, in high school, growing up in this state and being a huge Husker fan, seeing the way he handled himself as a Husker, all the things that he did off the field to give back to the community.
When I really feel Brook's presence is whenever I get a chance to go out, pheasant or quail hunting, and those many, many times that he and I were together.
I think when you're 18 to 21 years old, you always think you're going to live forever. And then when that doesn't happen and you see that in a teammate, somebody you know, a lot of guys at that point kind of reflected on where their life was headed.
I mean, he was just about, competing and being a great teammate on the field. So when you're around a guy that's that, I call it viciously competitive when they're on the field, it's infectious.
For Nebraska football fans, that had a 9/11 day feel to it that afternoon and, for the days that followed. It really did.
This tragic story now being reported from Lincoln, Nebraska. Brook Berringer, Nebraska Cornhusker quarterback, is reported as killed today.
Tonight, a tragic death of Brook Berringer, the Nebraska quarterback, was killed when a two-seat plane he was piloting crashed in Raymond, Nebraska today.
Berringer on the field stepped in for the injured Tommy Frazier in the '94 season. He won 7 games as a starter for that #1 team.
He had a pilot's license and often flew this 50-year-old plane, but
Brook Berringer was 22 years of age.
Brook Berringer is a Husker icon, and it wasn't just because of his accomplishments or toughness on the football field. To number 18, his time spent at Nebraska stretched well beyond the goal line. This is Brook, the life of a Husker legend.
The first exposure I had to Brook was not via a video. He came up to our football camp, and it would have been between his junior and senior year, I believe, in high school. And he impressed me because he was a good athlete. He was pretty tall, probably close to 6'4", and I imagine at that time probably 185 pounds. But he ran pretty well, and he was a good thrower. And little town of Goodland, Kansas. So I don't think he probably ever played in front of more than 200, 300, 400 fans at any one time. And then we did get some film on him, and we thought he looked good. And then I went down and watched him play basketball. And he was a very good basketball player, very good athlete. So we offered him a scholarship. I think Ron Brown was the primary recruiter. And so he came.
I think most people know that he was born in Scotts Bluff. So this was kind of a homecoming for him. The interesting thing about his recruitment was that Goodland, Kansas is kind of isolated, kind of like Scotts Bluff. And I know he was offered by a number of Big 8 schools, but, I wonder what where he would have gone had he been in a more centralized or more identifiable location. So I had studied him a little bit, yes, and I saw him before he played and before he took his first snap, for sure.
It would have been at our first gathering of our team, the recruiting class in 1991, and I'd only seen pictures of Brook, headshots and such at that point in time. We don't have the luxury of what kids have today of watching high school tape and their own YouTube channels and everything else. But the thing that caught me is he was about my height. He was about 6'4". He was a good-looking guy and had a kind of a distinct walk about him, if you would. He just kind of walked straight and tall, and his shoulders back, and kind of a long stride. And just remember his quick wit, and he was a funny guy. And he told some of the funniest stories ever to us all. But he's impressive at 18. at 18 years of age, he certainly is somebody would look at and go, that guy's he's a stud.
Yeah, I remember specifically hearing about him because he was highly recruited. I know a lot of Big 8 teams were recruiting him. And it was, at that time, you can imagine kind of the quarterback scenario. He was a year younger than me, and he actually came in and was competing with, probably one of the best option quarterbacks in the nation. So, every time there was mention of a quarterback, everybody was very interested because how that would play out in the competition and what it looked like for our offensive scheme moving forward. Just full of personality, just a unbelievable kind of persona about him. Great smile, great humor about him, very friendly. And he actually was very, very close with Aaron Graham, who I played with. And, so we hung out quite a bit. Both Brook, Phil Ellis, and Aaron, all those guys lived together. So, we'd be over at their house, just hanging out or going fishing, hunting, those type of things.
Berringer redshirted in 1991 and in 1992 played in just a handful of games. Till that point, Brook was a relatively unknown quantity. Frazier was the star, and Brook had to take a back seat.
Was he on my radar as a backup quarterback or before he ever played? Yeah, I guess the first thing, in this business you want to know is how do you pronounce the guy's name? Yeah, for most people, or a lot of people still today, they call him Berringer, So I looked at that roster, and I thought, I got to find out how you pronounce it. And so I knew it was Berringer all the way. But, it's your job when you do the radio play-by-play to know a little bit of something about every player when they get here, as you know. And so I watched him, in spring ball and in scrimmages and, was attuned to what Coach Osborne was saying about him and his potential and his raw skills. So I feel like I did know something about him. The first game of the season in '93, I think, was North Texas, and if I remember correctly, Tommy Frazier sprained his ankle, immediately when the game started.
Berringer in the ballgame. So Tommy is hurt. We'll send Jim Rose to find out what happened. Berringer under center at the 40 of Nebraska, opening series of the game. Snap to Brook. The give is to Calvin. 45, 50. Great move. 45, 40, and down to the 37-yard line.
Osborne keeps it simple for Berringer's first playoff. A simple handoff as he's into the ballgame in relief of Frazier.
Spread set for Nebraska. Berringer fade pass. Dixon's got it. 5 in there for a touchdown. Touchdown to Corey Dixon. Double tight ends, flanker right side for the Cornhuskers. And the snap. Berringer on an option. Drops back to throw out of it. He's got Reggie Ball deep, and it's complete inside the 5-yard line. A diving grab by Reggie Ball. First and goal at the 3. Berringer waiting for the snap with a long starting count. Huskers have the ball, and it's an option play, and Berringer gets in. Untouched. Touchdown. Brook Berringer.
And so he got in that first game in '93. And I think everybody's eyebrows raised a little bit because he was perfect. He was perfect throwing the ball that day. He was 7 for 7, threw for 124 yards, and that accounted for more than half of the yards that he threw for all year long in '93. And he had one touchdown pass and rushed for 2 others in that game. So yeah, he got some early action early in the season, and then when Tony Veland in the second game was lost for the year, he became the number 2. And so, he didn't play that much in '93, but I think that first game is the one I remember the most.
Brook knew he was talented, but he didn't have much of an opportunity on the field to showcase it. In candid conversations with teammates, Berringer admitted maybe it was time for a change.
For sure it did. And, there was one particular time where he and I were outside that house on 22nd and Vine that we rented, and remember we were leaning up against his. He drove a Mustang, and his arms are crossed, and he was just like, I think I'm ready to transfer. I don't want to play this game. I don't want to play my entire college career backing up Tommy. And I remember just encouraging him to hang in there, and you never knew what could happen. And so glad he didn't make that decision to transfer. And I'd also just add that in today's environment with this transfer portal, I've had this conversation with several of my teammates, including recently just with Brendan Stai, who, didn't start until his junior year because he was backing up on the greatest lineman ever in the entire game, and that was Will Shields. And I told Brendan, I said, if we had that transfer portal today, you wouldn't have been there. And he said, well, I don't know. And I said, and then he finally agreed, said, no, you're probably right. And I said, I know I'm right. And I'm also right in the fact that if that transfer portal was there at the time Brook Berringer was there, he most likely would have left, about that sophomore year. And I probably wouldn't blame him.
Yeah, it's interesting because Mark Gilman, who came in with Brook, Mark was my roommate, and Mark was talking about the same thing. And it was a different conversation with Mark because Mark, he still was learning how to play the game of football as far as getting tough, because it is a violent game, and he was tired of being injured or bruised up and battered, and he wanted to go play basketball. And Brook was a tremendous basketball player as well. And the two of them, I remember the conversations were about transferring, and Brook was for more about going to a place where he might have the ability to play right away. And Aaron and I, those conversations, were both to Mark and Brook. It's the same message is, if you stick it out, it'll pay off. And, we're going to get this national championship one way or another, and you're going to be a part of something special.
Berringer showed some glimpses of the player he could be in that 1993 season. He played in every game that year, save for Oklahoma, throwing for over 200 yards, a pair of touchdowns, and 1 interception. But Brook didn't get his real time to shine until the following season.
It was pretty somber. I'll never forget the day Coach Osborne came out. Actually, it was right after practice, and, we huddled together as an offensive line group and just kind of made our minds up that we were going to take the reins, but certainly missing our leader in Tommy. That was a huge uphill battle. But we knew, because in practice, believe me, the competition was always right there.
Well, as you can imagine, everybody was concerned. Every Husker football fan was concerned and curious as to, how this would change the complexion of what Nebraska looked like offensively, because the two guys were different kinds of quarterbacks, and nobody knew what would happen without Tommy.
Now with Nebraska football, here's Kent Pavelka.
Hi again, everybody, and welcome to University of Nebraska football. A tumultuous week, if you will, has passed since our last visit. It has not been business as usual since the Cornhuskers disposed of the University of Pacific last Saturday here in Lincoln. And as Nebraska tests the Wyoming Cowboys this afternoon, it's going to be done without Heisman Trophy candidate Tommy Frazier. So Husker fans come into Memorial Stadium today, and they fine-tune their radios across the country before kickoff, wondering what effect Frazier's absence will have on the Big Red. And Brook Berringer, and note, it is Berringer, not Berringer or Berringer, but Brook Berringer becomes the focus. The 6'4", 210-pound junior from Goodland, Kansas, becomes the starting quarterback, thrust into the spotlight by default, with an opportunity today to silence some who have said all year long that Nebraska would be nothing without Tommy Frazier.
And Wyoming was ahead in that first game, 21-7. And it was at that point when Berringer stepped up late in the first half. And I remember right before the first half, the Huskers went on a scoring drive. He finished it on, I think, a 4 or 5 yard run just before halftime.
Double tight ends, tight wing left is Klester, fullback is Schlesinger. Klester's in motion left to right before the snap. Berringer, long starting count, takes the snap, fakes the counter, boots to the right side, he'll run it all the way, he's in there, touchdown, touchdown, Brook Berringer, touchdown.
7 for 7 throwing the ball on that drive. And nobody knew at that point in time until later in the day that on that touchdown run, that was the play where he suffered the collapsed lung. So Nebraska almost lost to Wyoming that day once he did see the field as the starter. And it was a tight fit game, and it wasn't supposed to be.
Brook may be changing the play here. He has him on the eye set. 4 down lineman for Wyoming. He fakes the give to the fullback on the keep is Brook. He keeps the ball inside the 20, inside the 15, the 10, the 5. Great downfield block and the touchdown. Touchdown by Nebraska's quarterback, Brook Berringer. Into the eye set. Berringer may be changing the play here. Wide splits in the defensive line. Crowd comes to a hush on 1st and 10. Takes the snap, runs the option. Brook on the carry. Has a block by Schlesinger in the 5 to the goal line for the touchdown. Brook Berringer. yards out on the Huskers. Put another one on the board.
But, yeah, it was people were concerned, and I think probably more concerned when Wyoming took a 2-touchdown lead late in the first half.
Husker Sports Network Originals are presented by J-Tech Construction, the official exterior experts of Husker Nation. Find out more about this great Husker partner at jtechconst.com. Now back to Brook, the life of a Husker legend.
Well, I think the thing about the way he went through that year was that, you know, he had his injuries, his lung issues. We all didn't know about it until after the fact. For example, he started that next game after the Wyoming game. It started against Oklahoma State, and he was hurting. He was X-rayed at halftime, and he was done for the day. I don't think anybody knew that he was done for the day when they went to the locker room, but he was, and he spent the night in the hospital. But, you know, you watched Berringer playing with a flak jacket on, and I think in the rearview mirror, people were more impressed with his toughness when you stop to consider what he went through that season.
And the question everybody's wondering about right now regarding NU's quarterback situation is this. Brook Berringer has been cleared to play this afternoon. However, Matt Turman will start. Berringer is available. We'll just have to see how it goes, whether or not he'll be forced into service this afternoon. Here we go, and Brook Berringer in there at quarterback for Nebraska, in for Matt Turman. 2nd and 10 Huskers, 19-yard line of Kansas State. 7-6 NU with time running out in the first half. Brook looks at that Kansas State defense, trying to change the play. And the eye set, flanker left, split end right. Brook under center, Bill Humphrey takes the snap. Play fake, wants to throw, protection holds. He's got ball deep, throws it long. It's inside the 10, inside the 5, and the touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. It is 1st and 10 Cornhuskers. 30-yard line of CU. 10:55 left, third quarter. Nebraska 17-0. Double tight ends. Smash mouth look with the 3 backs in the backfield and the snap to Berringer. Drops back to throw out the play fake. He's got Alford there. Inside the 5. Touchdown. Touchdown. Touchdown to Eric Alford. Berringer waiting for the snap. Takes it. He gives it on a bootleg. Throws it in the end zone. There's a touchdown. Touchdown to Mark Gilman deep in the right corner of the end zone. And it is Brook on an option play. Brook on the keep inside the 25, inside the 20, inside the 15, to the 14-yard line. Brook Berringer could pick him up and put him down. He had Stai and Muhammad blocking ahead, Ted Johnson on the tackle. But I'm telling you, a guy that's 6'4" and as lanky looking as he is misleading in terms of how quick he is. He doesn't look that fast, but he'll turn a 4.6 40, 11 yards on the pickup thanks to Sean Buckley in Nebraska, 1st and 10. Brook is under center, takes it back, option play, drops back to throw out of it, looks long, he's got Abdul, he's beat the defense, it is touchdown! Touchdown! Abdul Muhammad, touchdown! So Nebraska facing 3rd and long with Iowa State and all the momentum in the world with 2 clutch passes, Berringer to Abdul Muhammad on both of them.
And one of the things I thought about during that year was to what extent the play calling was affected. You know, I think you were going to see fewer quarterback runs because Tommy was the quintessential running quarterback and Brook was supposedly, you know, the same as far as being a thrower. And the thing, again, when you think about that year, because of the injuries to both Frazier and Berringer, think about how important those backs were to that team and how they dominated, and they had to dominate. But how many guys are going to play with his long 40% collapsed and keep going out there and ask for more? So it's all about, you know, his legend. And, you know, it's more impressive as time goes by, as I think about it.
Well, Brook was tough. I mean, that's one thing that, you know, I knew and got to see firsthand. Matter of fact, the funny story is, you know, I mentioned that he and I roomed with Phil Ellis, and Phil Ellis was one of our co-captains on our 95 team, who's our starting middle linebacker. Well, he and Brook got into this wrestling match in our basement, and I was like, oh boy, this isn't good. And it was just us 3 down there, and being typical, you know, at that time, probably 20-year-old males, they were going to battle to the end, if you will. And I remember Phil giving it his all and Brook giving his all, and nobody beat anybody in that match. And that's a pretty bold thing to do when I don't know many quarterbacks that could take on your starting middle linebacker on your team and go toe-to-toe with them. And he did that.
In 1994, Brook went 7-0 as a starter. He threw for over 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns while completing over 62% of his passes. Brook's play was good enough to help lead Nebraska back to the Orange Bowl, where they were set to clash with the Miami Hurricanes. However, despite Brook's success, it was Frazier who won back the starting job during Nebraska's final scrimmage in Miami on Christmas Eve.
I don't recall exactly when or if Coach Osborne announced publicly that he was going to start Frazier instead of Berringer. All I remember was that's the way it unfolded. And I think all fans would have been good either way. I mean, you understood why he might start Brook. You understood why he'd come back with Tommy if Tommy were healthy. And that goes back to, the way most coaches, their philosophy is if you lost your job because of injury, you really didn't lose your job. So Frazier was ready to go.
I do remember it being a little bit weird, exciting at the same time. Think about that, those two weapons going into a game like that. And so really it was more about the principle of the matter. Brook had gotten us there, and we felt at that point, that Brook should have gotten the nod. But at the same time, I still believe in the system, and practice speaks for itself, how you grade out, and the coaches had to be comfortable with it. And I think, the conversations amongst ourselves was, either one of these guys could lead us to a national championship. Certainly Brook has put in the time and paid his dues throughout the season and came in and really saved the day for us. It was a little strange, seeing Tommy back out there, practicing down in Miami, and the two of those guys competing rep after rep, and then the coaches making the decision in the end.
Coach Osborne had to call on Berringer to rally the team. And one thing I think about is what would have happened if Coach Osborne had decided, no, I'm going to stick with Tommy. I can't let, we're down 10-0, but I don't want to suggest that we need to make a change. But he did make a change, and Berringer, rallies the team. And what a great story, when you think about the nuances of what happened, including, Brook's contribution during his career and in that game.
And it is Brook Berringer. Berringer, the 6'4", 210-pound junior who guided Nebraska to 7 straight wins when Tommy was on the shelf. Threw a couple of interceptions in the scrimmage here, and that allowed Tommy to earn the starting job. And when the second quarter begins, Berringer will be at the controls. 1st and 10 Nebraska at their own 29.5-yard line behind 10-0.
Berringer at the controls as the Cornhuskers take over in good field position at the Miami 40. Here we go, Kip.
Huskers need something on this possession. 1st and 10 Nebraska at the 19-yard line of Miami. Double tight ends, full house backfield. Lester Johnson in motion to the left side out of that. Brook drops back, rolls to the right, run pass option. He's got Matt Shaw. Matt Shaw's in there. Matt Shaw's in there for the touchdown. Mark Gilman's got the ball. Mark Gilman for the touchdown. Berringer on a run pass option. 1st and 10 at the 19-yard line of Miami. Rolls to the right as Gilman on a late release on the right side at tight end got into the end zone for the touch.
At the time, it was kind of business as usual. The coaches did such a great job in kind of taking the temperature of what was happening offensively for us during the game. And as the game wore on, it was evident that, running the football and running the option and running the short trap and those type of plays were going to just really put us in a position to wear them down and, have an explosive play here and there. And, again, Brook came in and, at the beginning of the game, and he broke the ice for us with Mark Gilman. That was kind of cool. Those two guys hooking up for that first touchdown. And, in Miami's defense stifled Brook. And, if you look back, I think we had like 5 turnovers in that game. It was kind of crazy. And so when Tommy and Brook, when they would come in and out, it was, for me, it was like business as usual. I had enough to deal with, with Warren Sapp and, that entire defense. They're so fast. But again, I thought it was a credit to the coaches and really taking the temperature of where we were in that game and how he substituted both those guys in and out.
We got 21 seconds to go. 20, 19, 18. Nebraska will win the national championship. The Cornhuskers beat Miami 24-17 and win the national title. Osborne just got Gatorated. There's the last second of the game, and it is official. It is history, 13-0, and bring that trophy back to Lincoln.
With Tommy Frazier set to return in 1995, Berringer spent the vast majority of his senior season on the bench in a backup role, a role that he took with grace and humility.
The main thing was that the next year they both came back, and they were both well. And I think there were players on the team that favored one or the other. So what we did is just threw it open. We said, well, whoever grades the best in fall camp will be the starter. And we really had a very talented team that year. And it probably wasn't going to make a lot of difference which one played because we had such a great supporting cast. But I think Brook had one interception in fall camp and Tommy had none. So we gave the ball to Tommy. And I think that was the significant thing about Brook was that, you know, a lot of guys would have tried to lead a revolt or make a mess out of things, and Brook didn't do that. He said the right thing, did the right thing. I knew it hurt him badly not to start, but he held things together. Tommy had a great year. We had a great team. Nobody came close to us that whole year, and we beat Florida at the end by 40 points or something like that. And it was the best team that I coached that year. So anyway, I had a lot of respect for him in regard to how he handled himself.
One of the things maybe that helped Brook was that the knowledge that he had played the previous season when Tommy had been injured, and that he was effective and he was capable, and he probably knew that, you know, at any given time it could happen again. But I think that the other thing maybe that was going on for him is that he had a suspicion that he had a future in the NFL after his senior year, regardless of whether he played or not. So all of that combined probably contributed to how Brook Berringer hung in there in 95 as a backup after his instrumental role in 94.
You know, looking back, I remember thinking to myself, you know, I mean, Brook, gosh, I mean, he'd be starting anywhere else in the country. But knowing his personality, you know, and understanding that at any given moment, the guy in front of him could go down. And, you know, that team was confident in having Brook being that backup. It was unfortunate, but again, Tommy had a Heisman Trophy winning season. I think he got robbed in the end. So there was no denying, you know, the level of play that Tommy, you know, afforded the team.
Brook was obviously disappointed. Let's don't sugarcoat it and say, look, he was just he was happy to be in the backup position. That certainly wasn't the case. But you know, he had really grown close in his relationship with Christ that year, and it showed. And he took the position that he was going to make the best of it, and he was going to use some of his influence that he had, especially with the kids in the state of Nebraska, and I think really be kind of a, you know, potential father figure or somebody they could look up to as someone that they could you know, want to emulate and be, and he certainly utilized that time to really give back to the community. I mean, it's not like he didn't have more that he wanted to prove. He certainly proved himself enough in that junior year in 94, you know, to know his value forever in Nebraska football history.
Between his volunteer work and time spent with the football team, Brook also had a passion for flying. Berringer had hundreds of flying hours logged and his professional pilot's license.
Yeah, well, I don't recall if he had earned his pilot's license prior to coming to Lincoln, but I want to say that he had some training that he still needed to do while he was at school, and I know he completed it, and you know, I had a chance to fly with him many times. It was definitely a passion of his. We'd fly in these little Cessna 152s, and you know, at that time I'm probably 6'4", 285 pounds, and Brook was 6'4", probably 220 pounds. And the very first time we went to go take off in what I called a go-kart with wings on it, we're tight in the cab, and he goes to pull back on the rudder as we're going down the runway, and it's hitting my knee, and he's like, move back. And I'm like, yeah, move back, you know, like we're going 70 miles an hour. And I finally wedged my legs underneath low enough so he could pull the steering mechanism so that we could take off. And I was like, that's how the first time we flew together was. But he was a good pilot. He loved to challenge himself in the air. He also loved to go to the Lincoln Municipal Airport and request that we could do touch and goes on their runway, which just to me seems like that shouldn't even be permissible. Maybe they don't even allow that anymore. This would have been early 1990s, but I remember one time them controlling the air traffic that was coming in on commercial flights because, Brook was, he was persistent on the idea of asking permission to be able to land on these runways and do touch and goes. And the initial response was always like, no way, turn around, get out of here. And he would somehow convince them to allow us to go do that. And so, we'd do 2 or 3 and I'd be like, let's go. There are jumbo jet aircraft around this thing and we're in a little go-kart with wings here, so.
On April 18th, 1996, Brook Berringer and his girlfriend's brother, Toby Lake, borrowed a friend's plane from a private airstrip just outside of Lincoln. Brook had flown that exact same plane a dozen times, but on that warm, windy day in April, it all ended in tragedy. Investigators later determined the plane lost power during its initial climb. With wind gusts reaching up to 28 miles per hour, Berringer failed to maintain control of the aircraft. He and his passenger perished when the plane took a nosedive into an alfalfa field near the airstrip. Berringer was only 22 years old.
We were actually scheduled to speak at a FCA banquet. Tony Veland was there with me. Coach Osborne was planning to be there, and so was Brook. And it was actually Coach Osborne who had broke the news to Tony and I just couldn't believe it. I mean, it was beyond shock, really. And it was one of those things that we elected to move forward. There were several hundred people who were at that FCA banquet, and we decided to move forward and not cancel the event since it was only minutes away. And at that point in time, it didn't hit me till obviously later when really had a chance to sink in. But just speechless. There was cameras in our face afterwards, and I really couldn't muster the words to say what I felt, and just still couldn't believe it.
Earlier in that day, we were taking like an excursion trip on one of those trimarans, and this guy taps me on the shoulder, and I had a Nebraska Citrus Bowl shirt on. He goes, "Hey, did you play with a guy named Brook Berringer?" And I said, "Well, yeah." He goes, "I think he died today." And I go, "What are you talking about?" Just like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, I thought I saw, something about, his years on Earth and, whatever they were talking about." I said, "Yeah," I kind of brushed it off because the draft was in a week. So I figured they were just talking about Brook, and I was just hoping, against everything that was not the case. And the day went on and I forgot about it. And we got back, we went to a bar, Justin, Jennifer, and I, and Keena went back to the boat. Well, as we're walking back to the boat before it takes off, Keena's leaning out the side of the boat, and she goes, "Did you know Brook?" And that's when it hit me. And so I went upstairs, and it's amazing how, as the world we live in today, how news travels, how fast it traveled to me on that boat in the middle of nowhere. And went up, and I made a call to Mark Gilman, and he was just beside himself, distraught, and that's how I found out.
I was the operations manager / program director for KFAB at the time, and I was coming off that 95 season, so I had spent a long day at the radio station, and I was driving home, and it broke on the radio, and I can't even put into words how it affected me, because it was such a tragedy in and of itself, but I, at the same time, was going through, I was at the precipice of being put out to pasture for my own future, and it all came crashing down at the same time. And really, the combination of that happening and then losing the football job myself, I think that's when I kind of became clinically depressed for a number of years, really. But that was just, you can't explain what a terrible blow that was to hear that on the radio. It was kind of like, for Nebraska football fans, that had a 9/11 day feel to it that afternoon, and for the days that followed. It really did.
I had a phone call must have been somebody from the sheriff's office, and they weren't real sure of the identity at that time, and they were a little concerned because I think Brook's pickup was parked at the little landing strip. I didn't even know he was flying that little plane, to tell you the truth, but I knew he was interested in flying, and so this little Piper Cub was what he was flying that day. Eventually, I went out there with a couple other guys. I think Ron Brown was with me, and a guy who had sort of been a spiritual mentor to Brook went along, and we came there. There wasn't much left, just a little metal framework of the airplane, and because it burned, and we very quickly knew that had to be the plane that Brook was in because of his pickup, and so it was a pretty tough day. Pretty tough week. I remember we had the spring game just a few days later, and they had a tribute to Brook that they played up on the video screens, and that was pretty tough to watch, and I think it was for all of our players.
The other thing that Brook and I had in common is that we both lost a parent before we got to the university. I lost my mom with cancer my senior year, and he lost his dad to cancer at a much younger age. I think, us both dealing with death at the level that we did at a younger age allowed me to focus on the things that I truly appreciated about our relationship and all the great qualities that he offered. And, I try to keep those things at the forefront of my mind. And he obviously died tragically at a young age, but he lived a pretty fantastic life in the few short years he was here.
There was plenty of speculation about what Berringer's future was in the NFL, a story left untold. Brook would eventually have his name called at the 1996 draft. However, it wasn't in the way anyone could have imagined.
In the National Football League and in sports generally, the death of Brook Berringer, the University of Nebraska quarterback who lost his life this week in an airplane accident. I would ask you to join us in a moment of silence.
There was a lot going on in my life at that time. His death occurred the day before the NFL draft, and I was drafted in the fourth round that subsequent day. But we'd planned a draft party at my home in Texas, and I had a bunch of family members friends who were making the travels to come over, and I felt like it was best to probably go be with them. I don't know if I'd do it any differently. His funeral was, during that time period, and I didn't get a chance to be at his funeral, so I felt like there was still some closure that I had to deal with.
Oh, I definitely think he had a chance, and so often in professional sports, the NFL included, it depends on, who takes you, where you wind up, and what needs are, etc. But I think, the consensus was that he would have been probably better suited for the NFL than the college game even. I mean, this guy had such a feathery touch throwing the football. And he was a better runner than he was given credit for. That's the other thing that is an interesting caveat to that part of Nebraska football history. Berringer was better as a runner than people thought. Tommy had the stronger arm, really, throwing the ball, but Berringer had such great touch that, you could see him as an NFL quarterback performer.
Because Brook, his forte was, certainly a great athlete and could run the option, but he could also throw the football. He had kind of that NFL stature about him, 6'4", very athletic, could move around in the pocket.
He had talent, and I know there was quite a bit of interest on the part of the NFL in him, and So that plane crash was kind of a tragic event because I'm sure he would have been drafted. It probably wouldn't have been a first or second round pick, but maybe as high as third, fourth, fifth round. And I think he'd had a reasonably good chance to make it just because of his height and his throwing ability and his character. So it was quite a blow to everybody involved.
I also think that, Brooks showed enough in that 94 season to grab the attention of the pro scouts, and a lot of people are aware, and I confirmed this with his mom Jan several years ago when we were together, because I just hadn't heard it directly from her. I'd heard others talk about it, but the Denver Broncos were planning on taking him with one of their draft picks in that 96 draft, and saddens me to think about that, because Brook was a Broncos fan. He grew up in Goodland, Kansas, about 3 hours or so away from Denver, and that'd be a dream come true for anybody to be able to play for your closest NFL team that you supported.
Berringer had a profound impact on everyone that surrounded him, especially his coaches and teammates.
I think when you're 18 to 21 years old, you always think you're going to live forever. And then when that doesn't happen and you see that in a teammate, somebody you know, a lot of guys at that point kind of reflected on where their life was headed. So he had a strong impact on the whole program, really. But he was a guy that I was in that room with him for 5 years because I was in the quarterback meetings and ran the quarterback meeting. So we got to know each other quite well. He loved to hunt and fish. And I remember one time I have a piece of property up northwest of Lincoln, not a very big place, and I had a problem with some coyotes. And I said, Brook, you think you could get a coyote? And he said, well, I think so. I remember he brought me a picture of this coyote. He'd called it in, shot it, and I remember how he was very, very proud of that accomplishment. That was kind of the guy he was, and just a generally good person. A guy that held things together for us during a really critical time.
When I really feel Brooks' presence is whenever I get a chance to go out, pheasant or quail hunting, and those many, many times that he and I were together.
There's certain people that you meet that have this lasting impression in your memory. You close your eyes, you see their face, and every time I close my eyes, I see Brooks smile, and kind of that witty laughter that he always had. The impact that he had on my life was he was a genuine human being, very compassionate, cared about his teammates, his parents, his girlfriend, and it was just it's so sad. They always talk about the good die young, and it's unfortunate. We live in a world where it's reactionary after the fact, and we prepare for the worst after we know how to prepare. And how do you ever prepare for something like that? I mean, it's just whenever you lose somebody at a young age, you start to reflect about how you live your life, and would it be the life that person, in this case Brook, would have lived. And so I think the message that Brook he would want everybody to know is that don't take this life for granted. Treat people like you want to be treated, and cherish every moment you've got on earth.
In 2006, Nebraska native Fred Hoppe created a sculpture of Berringer that still sits just outside of North Stadium. The statue depicts Berringer and Coach Osborne standing side by side, ensuring that Brook would be memorialized forever.
So when somebody came to me about the idea of a statue, I hate statues, and I said, no, I'm not going to have any statue. And then the guy who did it, I think kind of knew my weakness. They said, well, what about if we put Brook there? And I said, well, yeah, it makes some sense, because Brook really symbolized to me the best of some of our athletes. So anyway, that's how that came to be.
Well, I think that young people come through and see what's outside the stadium there, including Brook's statue, and they hear the stories, and I think it all comes together, all of it, to embody what the culture and the history of the program is. And I think it adds a lot to the story.
I think his off the field endeavors, giving back to the community have been very well written about, but how genuine that really was behind the scenes. He was such a great guy off the field, but on the field, highly competitive. I've been around a few quarterbacks in my time that had that kind of that competitive edge, and Brook was all about that. I mean, he was just about, competing and being a great teammate on the field. And you see that with teammates, obviously, with Coach Osborne. And so for him to be, immortalized in that statue in the front of the stadium every time, a student athlete, football player, all athletes, Nebraska fans, whoever enters that stadium understands that, that's the important thing here is, it's not all about you. It's about what you can give. And I think that Brook represented that as well as Coach Osborne.
I don't think there's any question about it. When you walk into the North Stadium at Memorial Stadium and you see Coach Osborne's statue, he didn't want that statue there, but he said, I'll tell you what, I'll allow it if you put Brook next to me. And I think that just says everything you need to know about their relationship and what Coach Osborne felt like his relationship was with Brook Berringer. And, I walk past that statue nearly every day and, just reminds you how precious life can be. And, he did so much in his short time on this earth. And I'm, one of the players that played here that's been lucky enough to receive the Brook Berringer Citizenship Award. And I was a part of that for a couple of years as a player here. And I know the guys that have been a part of that over the years have always, looked at him as an inspiration and somebody that led the way and doing the right thing off the field and helping children across the state and doing everything he could to use his platform as a Husker to make other people's lives better. And that's what Brook was about.
Well, I think for the people who knew him, that was the biggest part. I think for a lot of people, simply that he was very instrumental to our football team in '94 and held us to the point where we had an undefeated season and played a part in the national championship game. But most of them probably, if there's a special place in their heart, it's because of the plane crash and that happening not long after his career was completed. But I think for most of us who knew him, our main devotion or dedication to Brook was simply the kind of person that he was. And we've had a lot of great players, but he probably had the most impact on our football team because of his character, and it wasn't just because of his athletic ability.
Well, I don't think he's been forgotten, and that's a good thing. I certainly haven't forgotten our teammates, my teammates, haven't forgotten him. Certainly the fans of Nebraska haven't, and that we always make it a point to, swing by the statue of he and Coach Osborne on the north edge of the stadium when we're down there and snap a photo with the family. And my daughter, we've got 4 children, my only daughter, we gave her a middle name of her name is Landry Brook Graham, and obviously named after Brook Berringer. And she always enjoys getting a photo and understanding more of the stories in our relationship to understand why I would want to, and both not just on me, but her mom would have wanted to give her his name.
The proceeding has been a Husker Sports Network original. Brook, The Life of a Husker Legend, was narrated by Ben McLaughlin. Produced by Josh Hilkeman, Tim Curran, Ben McLaughlin, and Austin Orman. With sound design by Brett Whitty. Special thanks to Paul Jake Jacobson. Subscribe to Husker Sports Network podcast for more great Husker Sports original episodes presented by J-Tech Construction.